I'm probably not a very familiar figure to most of you. In fact, if I were to tell you my name, none of you here would even recognize it. For you see, my name was never mentioned in the scripture. I suppose if you want to try to find a label for me, the best you could find would be witness. Witness. Somebody who has experienced something. And that's exactly why I've come here tonight to be with you. Because I too have a story to tell. A very amazing and remarkable story. You wouldn't know it by looking at me now, but I was born blind. That's right, I was born blind. You can't know what it's like. Even if you were born blind, you wouldn't know what it's like. Because you have special teachers and methods to help somebody overcome this handicap. You have ways to help a man develop his other senses so that he can feel like he's a person, so that he can feel like he's part of society. You have made it so it's not an incapacitating thing as it was for me. You have to realize, for the people of my time, to be born blind meant one of two things. Either you were born blind because of something that you did, some sin that you committed in your mother's womb, or it's the punishment for something that your father did or the fathers of your father. To be blind meant to be an outcast. It meant to have only the life of a beggar open to you. And it didn't take long to realize how people felt about beggars. The pity, the disdain, the mockery, taunting all of the time until soon you began to realize that you were worse than useless because we were a burden upon everyone around us. And there was no hope. None at all. Oh, the doctors had done all they could, but there was nothing. The only hope for us was a miracle of God, and miracles aren't always that prevalent. And yet, that's exactly where my story begins. We had all heard of this man, Jesus. Everyone had heard of him. Some said he was a great teacher. Some said he had compassion like no other man. And some said, stay away from him. Don't go near him. He's a heretic. He's a blasphemer, they said. Don't be seen with him, whatever you do. And all of a sudden, there he was. Oh, I couldn't see him yet because I was blind. But I could feel him. I could hear the people talking. I knew that he was coming. I could feel the crowds around me growing and pressing in upon each and every side. And I heard them talking. And then I heard those disciples ask the question that I had heard so many times before. Who sinned, they said. Who sinned so that this man would be born blind? I hated that question. I despised that question. And yet it is a question that haunted me every day of my life. Why? Why was it that I had to be born blind? What was so terrible that I could have done in my mother's womb to be deserving of this kind of punishment? Why, if it was a sin of my father's, that I must be punished? Why? And then I heard this Jesus answer in a way that I had never heard anybody answer before. And he said, neither. Neither this man or his parents sinned. But he was born blind in order that the work of God might be made manifest in him. And I didn't know what he was talking about. And then he said something that I'll always remember. He said, while I am in the world, I am the light of the world. Oh, what a glorious word, light. I had heard people talk about light. I had felt the warmth of the sun on a hot summer's day, but light. What was light? Oh, what I wouldn't give to experience light. Would I ever know? I didn't know what was happening after that, but I could feel them getting closer and closer and closer until they told me later exactly what happened. This man, Jesus of Nazareth, came up and stood beside me. He spit upon the ground, and he reached down and made mud of his spittle in the dust, and he pressed it into my eyes. I didn't know what to think. I didn't know whether to get up and run or what to do. I suppose that sounds rather barbaric to you, but you have to realize that to us it was a belief that even the saliva of a great man held curative powers within it. He pressed it into my eyes, and then he said, "Go and wash in the pool of Siloam," a little pool of water outside your present wall of Jerusalem. And some people took me by the hand and guided me there, and I went. When I got there, I leaned down and I wiped my eyes with the water, and for the first time, my eyes were open. I could see. Light poured in like needles, stinging my eyes. The pain was intense, but I didn't care. It didn't matter, because for the first time I could see, and I didn't care if I ever shut my eyes again. I looked at the sky, and I saw that what the others told me it was true. It was blue. I looked down, and I saw the flowers, and I saw all the colors. I didn't know what colors they were, but I knew they were colors. And I could see the faces of people. The faces of the people I've known for my entire life. You don't remember what it's like to be born, but I do. That day, I knew what it was like to be born because for the first time in my life, I could see. And that really is the story I have to tell. Really a very simple one, isn't it? Once I was blind, and now because of Jesus, I can see. There is more. I want to tell you more about what happened, but that is really the story I have. I was blind, and now I can see. You can imagine that the Pharisees wouldn't let something like this go quite so easily. They were determined to prove that something was amiss in all of this. I was called before them, and over and over and over again, they tried to make me admit that this Jesus of Nazareth was a sinner. "Give glory to God," they said. "Admit this Jesus is a sinner." I didn't know whether he was a sinner or not. I didn't care whether he was a sinner or not. For the first time, I could see. He had opened my eyes. I would not say anything against him. There was one thing that they couldn't take away from me. Oh, they could shoot their intellectual arguments to try to shoot holes in all that others had said, but there is one thing they couldn't change, and it was that I had been blind, and now I can see. You wouldn't think, wouldn't you? You would think that others would have rejoiced in my good fortune, that they would have been glad for me. But that isn't the way it was at all. They turned away from me. They didn't want to be associated with me. It was as if my life had never existed before that day. It was as if they were saying to me, "How dare you? How dare you crawl out from under that rock you call your own blindness? How dare you allow this Jesus of Nazareth to open your eyes?" And even my parents, who I thought if no one else would stand by me, they would. They became afraid. They said, "Let him answer for himself. He's of age." They said, "Don't ask us." When the Pharisees found out that this had all happened on the Sabbath, and when they knew about the mud and the washing in the pool of Siloam, they were confused. But they had a case against Jesus for breaking the Sabbath. That's when they called my parents into it, and I suppose I shouldn't really blame them for denying me. You see, anyone who followed Jesus of Nazareth was liable to be banned from the synagogue, excommunicated. It was a fate worse than death, so we thought. And so I suppose I shouldn't have been surprised, but I still was. And over again, they taunted me and tried to make me disavow anything about this Jesus of Nazareth. But I wouldn't. I could still hear them yelling and jeering and taunting. Over and over and over again until I could stand it no longer. I don't know what it was. Maybe a burst of courage. Maybe I was simply delirious at my own newfound joy of being able to see, but I decided that I would no longer play these games. And I looked at them, and I said, "Why is it that you ask so many questions about this Jesus of Nazareth? Are you interested in him? Would you like to become his disciple?" I said. You can imagine their reaction. I should have been content with this little verbal victory, but I wasn't. And I pressed it even further, and I said, "What an extraordinary thing. What an extraordinary thing that this man is able to open the eyes of the blind, something that God can do. And you are the religious leaders, and you know nothing about him. Isn't that amazing?" And it was that point that they went into an uncontrollable rage, and I was banned from the synagogue for life. I didn't care. It didn't matter because Jesus had healed me, and I would not betray him now. I thought I knew what an outcast was while I was blind, but I knew nothing about it. For now, having been banned from the synagogue, no one would have anything to do with me. No one would be seen talking to me, or even near me. It was then that Jesus came back into the picture. It wasn't until later that we realized that this is always the way it was with Jesus. That just at the point of one's lowest and deepest despair, there he was to reach out his hand and to give his strength to us. He looked at me and he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" I didn't know what to say. I said, Lord, who is he? Tell me and I will believe." And it was at that point that he said to me, "You have seen him. The one who is speaking to you is he." And I fell down on my knees and I said, "Lord, I believe." And it was that day that I realized that earlier my blindness had only been partially healed. Oh, I could see just fine. But it was then that I began to understand. That I began to realize who this Jesus of Nazareth really was. Oh, it would be a long time before we understood fully. You who live this side of Easter and this side of Good Friday, you can look at the cross and you can know that there's victory there. We didn't know. We didn't understand. It wouldn't be until after the resurrection, and even after the ascension, and even then for a long time, before we began to know what it was all about. But we realized that this Jesus had let us in on one of the biggest secrets of the universe, and we began to understand. We began to know. And as I said, my story to you is a very simple one, and yet one that has made my life different. I was blind, and now I can see.